I'm delighted to have today on Economics Matters, the podcast, two twin brothers, James Rebitzer and Bob Rebitzer. And they're going to talk about their new book, Why Not Better and Cheaper? It's about the healthcare system. And we're going to have this looks like a really important book. It's got fabulous blurbs from very top folks in academia and the real world. And the story about Bob and Jim, beyond the fact that they're twins, which is pretty interesting on itself, and they actually talk to each other. Usually, brothers can have difficult relations, but these two guys like each other quite a bit, enough to write a book together. This may be the first book I've seen, and maybe the first book ever written by twin brothers. But that itself may make it worth reading. But anyway, let's talk about their backgrounds. Robert S. Rebitzer, Bob Rebitzer's, he's in the real world. He advises health systems, academic medical centers, health insurers, government, philanthropies about how to improve the quality and lower the cost of healthcare. He's a senior advisor at Manatt, M-A-N-A-T-T Health, and he's the distinguished career institute fellow at Stanford University. In the past, he was a partner in the healthcare strategy practice of Accenture and a vice president of United Health Group. That's a very large healthcare entity in our country, as far as I understand. He's also served as an advisor to the California Healthcare Foundation and to Stanford University's Clinical Excellence Research Center. And he's currently chairman of the board of EI Camino Health System. And that's Bob. Now, then we go into brother Jim, and brother Jim's the Peter, and he's my colleague at Boston University. That's how quite well. Let's start there. He's the Peter and Deborah Wexler Professor of Management at BU's Questrom School of Business, where he was founding chair of the Department of Markets, Public Policy, and Law. He's also an affiliate with our economics department. We're very proud of that fact. In the past, Jim was Mannix Professor of Healthcare Finance and Economics and chair of the economics department at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western University. He's a research associate at the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, and a research fellow at the Institute for the Study of Labor, IZA. Jim has received the Healthcare Research Award from the National Institute of Healthcare Management and the Kenneth J. Arrow Award. Ken Arrow was a Nobel Prize winner in economics and probably one of the top 5 economists ever, and also my first professor of economics when I went to grad school. Well, first of several firsts. Anyway, my first year anyway, first year professor of theory. He's the Kenneth J. He received the Kenneth J. Arrow Award. So any award that has the name Kenneth J. Arrow is a big award from the International Health Economics Association. Arrow is viewed as having started the economics of healthcare. Been lots of major healthcare economists. It's a whole field now, and we have Jim as our and Randy Ellis in our department are the 2 top health economists at BU. But Martin Feldstein, who was my healthcare advisor, was a big player in this area. We have Victor Fuchs at Stanford. There were just every top university economics department and business school have top economists who are focused on healthcare. So let me ask Bob and Jim, starting with Bob, to spend a few minutes talking about how they came to be working in the fields that they are, in the areas where this all started. So we can convey kind of the kind of idiosyncratic nature of career choice. Yet again, we've had so many people on this. This might be the 40th or so blog or podcast, and everybody has a story, and a lot of it is, well, it was luck or just happenstance that I actually went into this area. You guys went in it together pretty much, so you must have been talking to each other, and so you're in the lucky position of multiplying your luck, because one person has luck, they convey it to the other, and that then becomes luck for both. Anyway, Bob, start us off here.
Yeah, well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I must say that writing this book with my brother was one of the peak experiences of my life. So really, it's been fun. I began my working life as a community organizer, and I spent 10 years doing that, and I remain deeply interested in the problems of change. How do you get people to make change? The obstacles and the opportunities for change in our society, methods for mobilization in all sorts of settings. And through a series of unlikely events, I wound up going to business school at the end of all that. I was turning 30 and needed to make a living, and wound up, wonder of wonders, being hired by the firm that became Accenture. When I joined, it was Arthur Andersen, and then 6 months later it became Andersen Consulting, and then it became Accenture. And I started the healthcare strategy practice there long ago, again, through an unlikely event. I was on the beach, which is a bad place to be as a consultant. It means my clients had mostly gone belly up. I was doing local government consulting. And we got a call from Kaiser Permanente across the bay. I was in the San Francisco office, and their pathology group, which runs their massive laboratory system, could not. They called us over and said, "Would you do us a cost study?" And we said, "Why do you need a cost study?" And they said, "We want to know which site for testing, whether in the central lab or in the facility lab, what the true cost is, so we can make better allocations of where to do which types of testing." And we listened to them for a while. And then my partner stood up and said, "Well, we could do your cost study, but it won't help you." And they said, "How come?" And they said, "Because you don't know how to make decisions. So we can provide you with cost information, and you wouldn't be able to make good use of it." And they said, "What do you know about healthcare?" And we said, "Nothing." That's the good news, because you could tell us what we need to do about healthcare, and we could help. We could tell you how to make better decisions. And they hired us on the spot, and that was the beginning of my healthcare career. And I have been doing healthcare ever since.
Oh, very interesting. Where did you get your MBA?
At UCLA.
UCLA. Okay. And Jim, let's go over to you.
I started doing economics because I discovered in my junior year of college that I was no good at biochemistry. And I realized that I liked science, and the world, this was in the mid 1970s, the world was in tumult, and a lot of the tumult was economics. And I figured out that economics was a way to be a scientist without the lab. What could be better? So I got interested in economics, and I started off doing labor economics. And the big theme then was long-term unemployment. Why is it the labor market didn't seem to clear the way other markets did? And a lot of people at the time were working on, Larry Summers, one, Sam Bowles, others, were working on ideas that said, well, maybe we've misunderstood how labor markets work, and that what labor markets, what wages are, they're not simply prices, but they're part of an ongoing relationship of employees to firms. And so we began to build simple models of the insides of organizations and use them to try to explain why labor markets didn't work like other markets. And by this time, I'd gotten a job at the Sloan School of Management, because my first job was at UT Austin. But the management folks really were interested not in so much of the macroeconomics of labor markets. They really want to know, like, what do you know about organizations? Like can knowing something about organizations tell us something about economics? And I was there a short time, and they came in, they said to me, Jim, you're a really smart guy. We're really happy we have you here. I think, but we don't think you know the first thing what you're talking about. And you know what
Really?
you should do is stop playing with these cartoonish models of the insides of organizations that economists were enamored of, and go talk to people, and then go back to your models and figure and build your models and your modeling efforts from that. And I took about 6 months to recover, but I did, and it was terrific advice. So I became an organizational economist, and after a while, writing about professional labor markets, this and that, I realized that I was writing about organizations, studying organizations, kind of the way biologists study fruit flies. They got big genes and they breed fast, so they're good for studying genetics, but they're not intrinsically interesting organisms. And I was kind of doing the same thing in economics. And I sat down and I said, what we're knowing about the insides of organizations and thinking about economics at the same time and thinking about incentives at the same time, where would it matter? And I'm sure I was influenced here by my brother's experience, and I decided healthcare was it. So I made this deep dive investment into learning about healthcare organizations. And my brother was a huge guide for that. And learning about health economics. And I've been doing that ever since.
That's really cool. So your book is entitled, thank you for that background. By the way, I also came a cropper of a frog we had to dissect in biology the first year in college. I thought I'd be a doctor, and I left the lab deciding to major in economics. So was that so very similar. I'm also a twin, by the way, but fraternal. But the title of the book is, let's see, the publisher is Oxford University Press, which is as prestigious a press as you can get, probably as old a press as you can get. The title is Why Not Better and Cheaper? It's about healthcare and innovation. And we've talked, I think I've had George Halverson on this podcast to discuss a major reform. The US is spending 18 to 19% of GDP on healthcare. We're getting 21st ranking results in terms of healthcare outcomes. Sweden is spending 11% of GDP on healthcare and is ranked 4th. So George and I and others are pushing for something called the Better Care Plan, which would basically be Medicare Part B, Part C, the Advantage Plan for all, which would, but much more tightly structured so that these plans could not kind of gin the system and get around requirements to provide a standardized package of benefits and compete and lower the cost that way. But so our angle is that we think that the structure is screwed up. You guys think that it's not so much the structure. If I have this right, you're going to tell me some more, tell everybody, but it's really the way healthcare is operating, regardless of in the US, regardless of the structure. So, Bob, take us through the basic thrust of the book, and then Jim, I'm going to talk to you about your take on the thrust, and also why we're going to turn to you and ask why it's not about the structure as opposed to the way that you could have, let's say, my ideal healthcare system, and it would still be spending 18% of GDP and getting 21st ranking results. So, Bob, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would just begin by saying, I think the answer is yes, and it is the structure and something else, some other things that we'll talk about. Our book begins with a simple question, which is, why doesn't healthcare get better and cheaper like the cell phones would carry in our pocket? And our answer is that it's too easy to make money with low value innovations and too hard to make money with cost reducing innovations. And the reasons for that have to do with incentives. It has to do with professional and social norms and narratives. And it also has to do with the way healthcare markets work or sometimes fail to work. So that's our story. And I think it's a yes and story. I think that we would probably be congenial to many structural reforms. And we think we have to pay attention to the incentives for innovation and the direction that innovation goes.
So we're going to get into the specifics of what you just said in a couple minutes, but and then also come back to what you two folks think would be the kind of ideal structure of healthcare, but also the internal workings of healthcare of any of the ideal structure. But Jim, what's your take on why structure is not fundamentally the only problem, or maybe even the biggest problem, but it's really the way things are operating inside any of the systems we've got?
Okay, so think about so we have a system. We have a system right now that's based largely on fee for service, and fee for service tends to encourage sort of excessive spending where there's not much attention to cost effectiveness and things like that. And so you might say to yourself, okay, let's go to a Medicare Advantage plan, right? The type setup where people are paid. The payers receive a set payment, and they manage care, and they get to keep the savings. And sometimes they share those savings with the providers, so the providers do the right thing and make care more efficient, right? So that's good, right? That's about the structure. That's exactly the kind of thing you have in mind, Larry, and others do as well, right? And it's great, right? It would be an important improvement. The problem is the complication is that incentives of these kind of shared saving incentives, moving away from fee for service towards a more shared, it's actually incredibly difficult to make work in the healthcare system, in part because of the structure of the healthcare system. So, for example, I'm going to give you two examples. I want to talk about incentives, and then I want to move to talk about other parts that don't have to do with incentives, like the patent system. Okay, but first, so you got a healthcare system, and you've got shared savings, right? And so we have an incredibly fragmented system of payers in America right now, so that if one payer makes a shift from fee for service to some kind of shared savings plan of the sort that you that may or may not have an influence on what the provider actually decides to do. Especially if there's a big fixed cost for the provider to make changes, they're going to have to pay it. The first mover is going to pay a lot of that fixed cost, and the benefits, they'll get some of the benefits, but the benefits will spill over to other payers as well. And in that environment, the equilibrium is not to move to shared savings at all. And there's a fix to that. It's called a common agency problem. There's a fix to that common agency problem involving some external jumpstart. But if you don't if you're not thinking about how crude incentives are and how badly the system is structured to implement those incentives, you kind of won't see that problem. Another related issue. Think about the patent system. We are at grave risk of running out of effective antibiotics because bugs evolve, and they become more and more resistant over time to the existing antibiotics. So you'd think, given how valuable antibiotics are in the world, that they would that the thing you'd want to do is you'd want to have some smart drug company will want to come up with new antibiotics. That's a good business model. It makes society better off. It makes them rich. Everybody's happy. But it turns out that antibiotics are extremely difficult to make money at. Why is that? Because the first thing you do if you develop a new antibiotic is you don't use it. Right? You hold it in reserve. Wise stewardship requires holding the antibiotic in reserve until it's required, when the existing cheaper antibiotics no longer are effective. But the patent system, the market test in the patent system, doesn't work that way. And if you don't sell, that's a feature of the patent system. If you don't sell, the patent's not going to be worth much to you. But this is a case, a very important case, where what you want to do is you want to separate what the innovator gets from the sales of the product. And the book is full of examples where what looked to be sort of regular old, easy to manage incentive problems in the healthcare system turn out to be just much, much harder to implement than their own. And it's the healthcare system is not a place where if you just get incentives right, everything works.
So, yeah. So, okay. So you're saying, for example, in the patent area, we might want to have a longer patent life for companies that are innovating antibiotics because we know they won't be able to actually make use of the patent for maybe the first 5 years or 10 years. And you're also talking about the fact that given the current structure, which goes back to Bob's point, this and that there's two interconnected problems here. Innovation being stymied and the structure impacting the innovation, but anyway, you're saying that I think I want to ask Bob to give us some examples of more examples than you just mentioned. The patent's very interesting one and not being able to really change the structure that would make an innovation of value to the innovator. But Bob, give us some more examples. You said the book's full of examples. Again, just to keep advertising this book, here it is. And just to be clear, that this is, we don't have pictures of you guys. Do we? Well, we have pictures of you now, but I'll just read one verb here. Rebitzers explore an overlooked feature of the system. It is too easy to profit from low-value innovations and too hard for cost-reducing innovations to find a buyer. The book is full of engaging examples and policy ideas. Anyone who cares about innovation in healthcare and wants to make things better should read it. This is David Cutler. He's basically the top economics, healthcare economist at Harvard. He's the Otto Eckstein Professor of Applied Economics at Harvard. I'm old enough to have known Otto Eckstein. He was a professor. He started really large-scale data processing with his company Data Resources Inc. While he was still a professor at Harvard. I and Alan Auerbach as professor at Berkeley. Just a little side comment. Alan's now at Berkeley, but he started out his career at Harvard as a professor. We're both in grad school there, and Alan got hired by Harvard. And Otto gave everybody free accounts and free computer accounts. And Alan and I decided we would take that up. And because we were doing some joint work, we started using more computer time than any of his customers. And we basically started driving him out of business. And he called us up and said, "What the hell are you doing?" "No, we're just doing a lot of processing I have to do for this research program." He said, You're out. You're out of here." Somebody else to exploit. But Bob, let's turn to the issue. I want to have you tell us about some of these engaging examples and policy ideas. Give us a bit of the flavor of the book without giving away everything. Of these examples. And then Jim, maybe you could take us through the book kind of chapter by chapter, telling us, hey, here's the chapter title, and this is what it covers.
Sure.
And then kind of riff off of that. Okay.
Yeah, great. Perfect. So one of the things we write about in the book is a phenomena that in healthcare that we call missing innovations. And these are good ideas with the potential to reduce costs, sometimes reduce costs and improve quality, that just don't take off, that get stuck. They either become perpetual pilot projects, or they take decades to mature. And not everything in healthcare works that way. but you see some examples of it. So let me give you some examples of missing innovations and then some contrasts. So one story we like to tell is about something that's in the news a lot now, which is called Hospital at Home, which is an innovation. It's a way of delivering acute inpatient care in the home setting, which can be very valuable for some people who are either homebound. In some cases, it can save quite a significant costs and produce better outcomes for the right set of patients. And Hospital at Home was really first explored on a research basis in the 1970s. And there have been particularly a guy named Bruce Leff and his colleagues have been very actively promoting the idea since the 2000s. But it wasn't until COVID and the COVID pandemic that the thing took off. And what made it take off was CMS passing a waiver that allowed for hospital care to be at home.
Just be clear, CMS is the Center for Medical
Services. Forgive me. Yeah, that's right.
Which they regulate both Medicare and Medicaid. So it's a government agency. It's like Social Security for Social Security, CMS for Medicare and Medicaid.
That's right. Yeah. And so why do we have this multi-decade wait? Particularly, why were the innovative private sector payers waiting around for the government to reimburse this slow-moving, politically encumbered government payer? But none of them were moving until CMS moved, until Medicare moved. And when Medicare decided to pay for this feature, suddenly everybody's willing to pay for it. And that's, for us, is an example of a missing innovation. For decades, it doesn't progress. And it's an example of what Jimmy was talking about earlier.
So Bob, just on this, so an example of this is Zoom office meetings with your doctor, right? That's part
it was much more than that. It's people who are really seriously ill, who are receiving levels of care that we would normally consider to be inpatient care, but they'd be receiving them in their home. So you wouldn't be doing surgeries at home, or probably post-surgical recovery at home. But this is for the management of, it's particularly good for the management of chronic diseases like COPD, obstructive pulmonary disease, or diabetes, or people who are seriously ill from those diseases. And they can often be, we're discovering, can be treated to good effect, sometimes at lower cost, in their home. And it's taken much longer than it should to move forward.
So is this visiting nurses and doctors coming to your house?
Yeah. And
remote monitoring.
And remote monitoring, and remote and home infusion when there are infusion therapies involved. It's quite remarkable. And it's become kind of a movement. There was a big New York Times article about it in January.
So let me ask you, just on this home hospital, innovation. After COVID, Massachusetts doctors, I live in Providence, commute to BU. I was able to visit with my doctors remotely during COVID. Right after COVID, CMS must have changed its regs, because now we're back to the doctors in Boston at Brigham's Hospital, where my doc hangs out. I'm connected. The insurance works through them. He can't call me in Providence because he doesn't have a license to practice in Rhode Island. So consequently, I have to basically, he says, well, if you lived in Massachusetts, if you were physically in Massachusetts, which is 5 miles away, basically, because Rhode Island's a small state in the country, we could have this conversation. So now when I need to have a Zoom conversation, I just say, I'm in Massachusetts.
Right.
And maybe I'm in my car in Massachusetts, and maybe I'm not.
Or maybe you're not.
And he's happy, and we have that conversation. So there are ways to get around it. But has this thing been revoked by CMS, or is it really? So
they're just, I don't want to dive too much into the weeds, but the problem you're describing is kind of a separate issue, which has to do with the control of licensure of medical professionals, as generally happens at the state level. And so he may be licensed to practice in Massachusetts. He may not have a license to practice to treat someone in Rhode Island. That's separate from what Medicare is doing. What Medicare did do, telemedicine is another example of what we call a missing innovation. And it was technically possible for decades, and it just didn't take off until COVID. And there was when CMS, Medicare, changed its regulations to permit federal funding to reimburse. The question that's interesting is why the private payers lag in this case. So it's
and we spent part of the book working through that,
Yeah.
working through the microeconomics of that,
the incentive problems.
in delightful prose.
In delightful prose. I'll throw out another one, okay?
Right.
Missing innovations, and it's a category of innovation. It's we call it slightly worse but much cheaper. You know, Whole Foods versus Safeway out where I am. Tesla's versus Chevy Bolts. In every other part of the economy, slightly worse but much cheaper innovation is a really, really important part of innovation, and it really is a powerful way for people to improve their welfare and for society to improve its welfare.
And for costs to come down.
Healthcare struggles with this. This is one of the examples where culture and norms play a big role. And a great example in the United States recently was the rapid COVID tests. You remember when COVID first came out, the tests were developed that were called PCR tests, polymerase chain reaction tests, and they are the gold standard. They determine if there was a piece of COVID virus in your body, and you know definitively if you have the virus or not. The problem with those tests is they're really expensive. They require a centralized apparatus and machinery, and the access and the turnaround time was very slow. And so by the time you find out if you had COVID or not, you've infected 100 other people. So through immense innovation, another type of test was developed, and which we called rapid tests, right? And those are the tests that in 15 minutes tells you if you have COVID or not. Now, these tests are much less sensitive than the PCR tests. They're not the gold standard. And American physicians really struggled about how to make use of these tests. And the United States, for a variety of reasons, but including these, we don't have an ethical framework and a professional framework that accommodates slightly worse but much cheaper. And that just is an example of that. But that's a category of innovation which is largely absent in healthcare, but which is really very important in every other dynamic sector of the economy.
So
I could go on. And we don't. Why do we still pay insurance claims, Larry? What is that all about? Why, alternatives to insurance claims and the multi-billion-dollar industry of what is euphemistically called revenue cycle management, where hospitals load up with programmers and sophisticated techniques for denying claims, for applying for claims, and insurers do the same. Billions are spent. No value is created as far as I can discern, and we're still playing that game. We're playing the arms race of revenue cycle management. Why are we still paying claims? Why don't we find a way to settle payments much like we do in the rest of the economy? That's another example of a missing innovation.
Yeah, let me give you two of mine that concern me a lot. One is So one is electronic medical records. It's still the case that in our country, if you go to Tufts University, I see one doctor there. She wants to communicate with doctors at Brigham's and Women's, and the reason I'm dealing with her is she was at Brigham's and Women's and she moved to Tufts. So I like her, but I have to be assigned to a doctor at Brigham's. So I actually have two docs. And she can, through some mechanism, but not in real time, get a hold of the medical test results from Brigham Women's, and they can potentially get stuff back from Tufts. But it's not really well connected. I found even at Mount Auburn Hospital, which is one of the Harvard teaching hospitals, one of the top Boston, it's like it's like MGH and Brigham's and Beth Israel, Mount Auburn. Mount Auburn, for my mom who went there are parts of the hospital that weren't connected with the other parts of the hospital electronically in terms of the medical record. They couldn't pull up the medical records from the other part of the hospital. And this is still going on to this day.
So, Larry, what we spent a significant in our chapter on missing innovations, we spent a lot of time on electronic medical records.
Yeah,
that's a classic example for us.
I mentioned George Halverson, who I believe, and he wrote a book too. He was the former CEO of Kaiser Permanente. Bob, you may know him personally, and he's he told me, and I had him out to speak at BU, that he was the one who brought electronic medical records to Kaiser. And many other innovations. Maybe I'm forgetting exactly that story. Correct? Maybe it was somebody else, but I think it was George was the first. He was very focused on innovation. Do you know George personally, Bob?
I've met him, and success, as they say, Larry, has many fathers. I think if you speak to people, he was certainly a critical role. Robbie Pearl. There's a whole slew of Kaiser. Kaiser has been working on the problem of electronic medical records and all the other organizational changes needed to make them really affect care. I had a ringside seat. I got to see a lot of that. They spent about $4 billion. It began in the late 1990s, and it's still going on. It's a deep commitment of the organization to make this technology work and integrate it into all aspects of what they do. It's remarkable.
They're also into team. Is team medicine part of what? I mean, that's the other thing. You have that one doctor is not talking to the other doctor, even though they have these gateway.
So part of what we talk about
more than one doctor.
So part of what we talk about in our book is that a lot of successful change and technology adoption in healthcare is really a phenomenon of culture and norms. And one of the remarkable achievements of Kaiser Permanente, and one of the things that's extremely difficult to imitate, to reproduce, is a culture they've built up over decades. One aspect of that is it's highly collaborative. The curbside consults are deeply part of the culture, but there are other parts of it as well that really enable certain types of technological change that are harder to do in fee-for-service, more atomized, more fragmented systems.
And Kaiser, we should recall, is this kind of you go and you pay one amount and you're taken care of for the entire year, and Kaiser doesn't get more money. It's an HMO.
It's an HMO. It's one of the early HMOs, and their doctrine is really one of what they would characterize it as pre-paid group practice. So the pre-payment part is what you just referenced, and the group practice, the culture of group practice, is the other item that you just raised, and that's they would say is their secret sauce.
Got it. So, because just to be clear to everybody, if we make one payment to a healthcare provider like Kaiser, then, or because it's a Blue Cross plan, and the hospitals and doctors are not charging us every time we show up, then they're not going to get extra money for having us have excessive number of appointments. My mom, when she was 98, her biggest friends were her doctors. She used to go because Medicare would pay for every doctor visit, and the supplemental policy would also pay, and I would pay for the supplemental policy, my brother and sister, and the whole thing was rigged so that she could basically hang out with her doctors, and every other day go and she didn't need to see the doctors that often. But since I couldn't say, Mom, it's going to cost just too much money for you to be doing this, she was just game for checking out every little thing that bothered her that morning. That's also part of the problem. Jim, take us through the book piece by piece. How's it structured, and what are the chapter titles and
Well, we wrote a short book. We decided, the old joke, apologizing for writing a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. We decided we would take the time to write a short book in the hopes that people would read it. There's
124 pages. That's it. Actually, wait, that's the appendix. How many pages is this? Like 100? Basically 100 pages.
100, 120, 118, 117, something like that. And the appendices, which are really good, my brother made me put in the appendix because the book was going to be short. And there's really good stuff in those appendices. People should read them. That was our compromise. But anyway, so there's 7 chapters. The first chapter tells the story of the book. It tells the story of why it is that this abundantly innovative sector of the economy too often generates the wrong kinds of innovation. And the focus, our explanations of that focus on the limits of incentive pay and the shared savings that you talked about, Larry. The importance of non-financial incentives, complementary incentives, which can either turbocharge or inhibit whatever the economic incentives are driving people to do. And finally, the role of competition. And the first book, we talk about what the first chapter rather is called economically valuable innovation. And what we're doing is we're trying to describe how economists and managers think about creating value through innovation in healthcare. So there's some discussion of the patent systems there and some discussion of how you assess value in a complicated and ethically charged environment like the healthcare system. The next chapter is called Missing Innovations, goes through 7 what we think are big ticket missing innovations, including electronic health records of the sort you talked about. But there are others, and some of the others that Bob mentioned. And the point is not that we've identified every missing innovation in healthcare, or that every one of the missing innovations that we identify is entirely missing, right? Sometimes they're just bottled up as demonstration projects, or they just don't go anywhere. They just don't take off the way they should. And the point is to get people sensitized to the idea that there's an innovation problem here. And when we think about innovation in the health sector, we're not simply thinking about new treatments or new devices or new drugs. We're also thinking, as Bob's examples highlight, about new care processes, new business models. All those seem to be bottled up. And that's the point of that chapter, is to make that point. The next 3 chapters kind of make our sort of analytical economic argument, in beautiful English. The first is about shared savings. And there we talk about what are the limits of incentives in the health sector, right? And we focus on 3 limits, 3 factors which would make incentives much more problematic in the health sector than in other areas. The first is the problem that we have a very fragmented payer system. The payers often have the interest in innovations, but the very fragmented nature of the innovation system means that no individual payer, or it's rarely the case that the individual payer is going to be able to change behaviors by changing incentives in a dramatic way. You kind of need to coordinate amongst the payers. And that's where the federal government or some other external jumpstarter can make a big difference. The second problem with innovations has to do with time frame. A whole lot of innovation in healthcare involves dealing with a problem now to save money 20 years down the road. Think of diabetes management or obesity. And in a healthcare system like ours, where you have a lot of fragmented payers, where people move amongst insurance companies for reasons having to do with labor market, but also having to do with imperfections in the insurance market, the payers who make the investments now in obesity or in diabetes care often can't capture the returns in the future. And that's a really hard problem that's very, very difficult for the healthcare system to solve. And the third has to do with quality measurement. You put in a lot of cost-saving incentives on somebody, and you don't have good quality measures, or your quality measures lack statistical power, and you're asking for a recipe for disaster. we talk about how the various ways organizations try to address that and why those ways of addressing the problem are sort of inadequate. So if you're in a world where incentives can't be real refined, where they miss a lot, how else do you motivate people to adopt value producing or cost reducing innovations? And that's the next chapter, which is about beyond financial incentives. It's about the role of norms and narratives. And it's a point that we make in the book that Darren Acemoglu has made in his recent book about robots and automation and technology, which is that when you're talking about innovation, narratives matter enormously. What people think they ought to be doing, what people think is possible in a world of so many possibilities, that's really important. And so we talk about the role of the norms and narratives that are really powerfully embedded in the medical professions, and we talk about ways in which they can help complement incentives and ways they get in the way. And then the last part of the book is about competition and disruption. And basically the argument is that when you have healthcare, these tends to be delivered in very local markets that tend to be heavily concentrated. Really, you mentioned Brigham and Women's, right? Brigham and Women's is really the partners, or what they call themselves now, Mass General Brigham Women. Yeah, Mass General Brigham Women, right? They're like a giant beast, and they really dominate the market, and that's true in almost every large city you could think of. And concentration like that has a powerful effect on innovation. And in the case of big dominant players, one of the things we really emphasize are something called switchover disruptions. Every time you introduce a new business process or a new care process, things get disrupted. And when you've got a large, profitable incumbent, that disruption is going to be really costly for them. So unless their dominant position is at risk, they're going to have fewer, they'll slow walk the new innovation because it's going to disrupt their ongoing business operations. So we spent a lot of time talking about how the problem of competition and how that makes the problem of innovation, particularly process innovations, worse.
So it really is what Bob pointed out, which is the end, not the either or, but both.
Yes.
What's, the innovation being stymied by the structure. Let me ask you, Bob.
Wait, before you go to Bob, right?
Okay.
Sorry, Bob, I know. But there's the last chapter, right? The last chapter is where we talk about what's to be done. We call it dilemmas and opportunities. And there we talk about reforms to the patent system. We talk about reforms to the data infrastructure. We talk about, what am I leaving out? We talk about reforms to medical education to try to address the norms issue, so that physicians see themselves as, are trained to innovate and also to see themselves as social stewards, the stewards of valuable social resources. Anyway, so that's the book. Then there's the appendices. Don't forget the appendices.
And it's beautifully written. I should say it's beautifully written. We have to say that too.
You got to say that too.
Which of you is the better writer?
Oh, I'm a very good writer for an economist, and Bob is a very good writer. So that makes him a better writer.
Yeah.
Larry, the difference between us, I never let the facts get in the way of a good story. Jimmy never lets a good story get in the way of really understanding what's going on. So between the two of us, we usually find a good spot.
I see. Did you guys have any fights writing this?
Yes, we did, over the title.
Oh, yeah.
I really wanted a nice, simple title that anybody could get. Oh, the other thing is I told Jim that if we use the word externality anywhere, the readership drops by 50%. And so it's like asking him to tie his arm behind his back. But he did it. He went along.
I went along.
So Bob, back to you. It seems, let's suppose you're the healthcare czar. We have a dictatorship. It's not that the former president gets back into power and decides to abolish elections and whatever. But rather, you're running the show entirely. You're the benevolent hopefully benevolent dictator of our country, what would you do about the structure of, how would you restructure the healthcare system to both improve its structure, but also to make it such that these innovations that are so valuable that are not happening actually happen? You know, for example, I can't really have a Zoom call with my doctor living in Providence unless I lie about where I'm stationed. As far as I know, Mount Auburn Hospital, we're talking about the best places. One building that's doing X can't talk to the other building that's right next door that's doing Y about the same patient. Talk about lack of teamwork
Right.
here.
Right.
Now, obviously, if we had this Better Care plan, which was basically Medicare Advantage for all, HMOs for all, competing Kaisers, okay, where you had much more, let's say, scrutiny, or provisions, so that the entities, the competing players, could not basically free ride on this system and not do their job and say, well, time for you to go to traditional Medicare, because traditional Medicare wouldn't exist. And
Right.
everybody, and traditional employer-based healthcare wouldn't exist either, unless the employers wanted to admit anybody who wanted to join their healthcare system. So GM has a healthcare plan for its employees. Well, they would have to be a competing Medicare or Medicare Advantage plan in effect, or a Better Care plan, and take anybody who wanted to join their plan. They could continue in the healthcare business if they wanted, but they would have to take everybody and couldn't turn anybody down. Would that be, you're the dictator, is that one of the first things you set up, and then what do you do beyond that?
Well,
or maybe not,
yeah,
or maybe
well,
keep the grant system.
I'm going to artfully dodge your question, Larry, but I'll do it in a way that hopefully you find interesting. I think that there are 3 critical things and 2 others that we've got to do. And I think there are a lot of different structures and systemic ways to do it. The first thing we have to do is we have to figure out a way to share the benefits of cost reduction, to share the savings that come with cost reduction with providers and with patients, so that everybody, that we can deal with some of these incentive misalignments. And there are a lot of ways to do that, but that's one imperative. I think the second imperative is that we have to make healthcare markets more competitive, because it's too easy for these entrenched incumbents to overlook potentially value innovations when they have the option of raising prices instead. And then I think the third thing, and this may be the most important thing, and here I may be channeling Uwe Reinhardt, the famous Princeton economist, is I think a great deal of the issues of our healthcare system are issues of value. And in the United States, we are ambivalent about what kind of system we have created here. Is it a system where everybody is entitled to healthcare, or is it like any other consumer good, the clothes I buy or the car I buy, where people get to, buy what they want to buy based on what their ability to pay? And we go back and forth. We just, as a society, we haven't resolved that question. And some of the dysfunction and pluralism in our system is a result of the fact that as a society, we haven't resolved that question. And so I think I would put a lot of time and energy on the moral and the value dimension of it, because unless we have some agreement on that, it's very hard to get to the kind of structural changes that you're proposing. Jim would add 2 other things.
Yes.
And do you want to add them, Jim, or shall I add them for you? You could add them.
I'll add them.
Yeah.
What the hell? Yes, there's 2 other things. The first is I would, before I say the 2 things, I think your idea would be a terrific step forward, right? So this is not like in opposition. What Bob suggested is not in opposition to that. But I think that one thing is we need to think hard about the market tests in the patent system and whether they deliver the kinds of value creating innovations that whether they reward the kind of value creating innovations that we should have. And I think that there's a lot of work that's been done there, and there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of theory and economics work, but there's a lot of institutional reform that needs to be done there. And then the second thing is the data infrastructure in healthcare is awful. The system does not collect data in a comprehensive way. And there are legal strictures and moral strictures against doing cost effectiveness analysis and using that to guide decision making. And if you don't fix those two things, I don't think you're going to fix the innovation problem in healthcare just by doing the first three things Bob mentioned.
I see. So you guys would do some very major things, and this book should be presumably read by all 535 members of Congress, right? It just came out, right? It's like a month ago or something.
Yeah.
And you can get it at your local bookstore or some non-Amazon distributor, but also at Amazon, right?
Also at Amazon.
Also at Amazon. But this is also a book for the public to understand, whether we're having a conversation by people like DeSantis and Biden and that actually, and Robert Kennedy Jr., whether we're having any real intelligent conversation about things like, why is it that we don't have a national electronic medical record system, so that if you're sick in Iowa on a trip, visiting your granddaughter, they can have immediate access to your records, so that you don't have to be telling them what drugs you're on when they give you something that doesn't interact well with what you're on already. I understand that the third leading cause of death in the country, I got this from Lee Chen, who's a senior professor at the dental school at BU, who teaches all the medical courses, that the third leading cause of death in the country is malpractice.
Misdiagnosis.
Medical mistakes. That's just horrific. And one of the reasons we're ranked 21st. So we should be having candidates discussing being able, eliminating these kind of ancient provisions about the doctor can practice here but not there. We should be eliminating state licensure and just making nationwide licensure. We should have nationwide electronic medical records, the hospital at home, and all the other innovations that you guys are discussing, and also be talking about changing the structure so we have effective competition, so that if Mount Auburn doesn't get it together, people can go to a Kaiser, but Kaiser wouldn't be just located in California. They would be required to operate nationwide, because that's one of the concerns, is that you have these HMOs operating in certain regions but not in others for profit reasons. I know that when Obamacare was implemented, there were a lot of plans, I think, in Texas, but now I think almost all maybe it's trying to remember what, in many of the cities, there's just one or two plans that provide, they're part of the Obamacare system, and they're located in the poorest neighborhoods, so that if you happen to be located over here, could be miles to get to there, and so effectively you don't have the quality of care that was envisioned by Obamacare. So Obamacare is like an eighth way step, not a solution. So we have basically a blueprint for partial blueprint for fixing the system. My book called The Healthcare Fix back in 2010.
I remember it.
More about the structure. We have Amy Finkelstein and a co-author. They're going to be on in about a month, talking about their new book, which is, I guess, more. I haven't actually read it yet, but so I'm not sure. But I think it is more about the structure, and I think it's trying to give basic healthcare to all for free, is my sense. But maybe I've got that wrong. So that's more like a national healthcare system, like the British have. Do you think? Let me ask you. Close out our conversation with this question, which I think is an important one, and maybe it's one that I've been overlooking, which is that people get used to their doctors, and that even if we had the kind of competitive Medicare Part C for all, but an asterisk, a much better version of that, of Medicare Part C than we now have, much more regulated to promote competition. We had the best structure, and we had, things lined up better to incentivize innovation across the whole system. Because if Mount Auburn can't get it together or the plan that includes Mount Auburn can't get it together to get their electronic records up to date, you'd have an incentive to go over here. But that means you got to leave your doctor. That means you have to leave maybe nurses that and you might have been with your doctor for 10 years. It might be more important to you to be with your doctor that you trust and you like. He's your friend. And, some of these conditions people have are not really going to be cured, but they can be mollified by having somebody who's caring. And that may be what doctors are providing, more of the psychological benefits rather than medical benefits. Would competition really work? Would people actually pick up and move with their feet across systems to make the innovation happen? Because if you don't innovate, we're going to lose customers. Do you think that would happen? Would it happen enough? Let me ask you both to respond to that, and then we'll call it a day.
Okay.
Sure. So can I begin, Jim, and then pass it to you?
Yeah.
So this is not a theoretical question. This is an empirical question, and we see it all the time. And in California, where I'm sitting, you have the Kaiser system, which is a very, very large player, and then you've got some very large PPO systems that can PPO type networks that can preferred provider organization networks that compete with them, like Blue Shield of California.
Whatever doctor you want to go to.
Whatever doctor you want. And the rule of thumb is and Kaiser tends to be very sticky. When people join the Kaiser system, if they've been there for a year, they tend to stay there for the rest of their time in insurance. And the PPO plans tend to be more porous. But we've seen examples where, for example, when Kaiser has made pricing mistakes and overpriced or underpriced, that people actually are quite willing to move in response to signals. And the rule of thumb is that the market has kind of three segments. One segment that's very price sensitive, one segment that is very choice oriented, and a third segment is sort of in between. And so I think that's something like that is probably true in most places, and that there'll be movement. But change in healthcare is closer to the kind of structural change that you have advocated and articulated so clearly, Larry, is closer to a social movement than it is to consumer choice. And typically these big changes are often accompanied by other big social changes. They don't just happen because prices and features change. It's part of something else big that's going on.
I see.
So I really like Bob's answer, but I just want to say
I'm wrong.
Not this time, but there will be, but next time. But no, and there's actually some empirical studies by Amitabh Chandra that sort of make that point as well. It kind of looks like, while they're not, the markets aren't competitive, the market share does respond to price and quality in healthcare. But I want to go back to how you led in, Larry, to the question, because I thought it was so interesting. You talked about Amy Finkelstein's new book, and we should be talking about our book, not her book, right? But I just want to. I was at her book launch, and I have heard her talk about the book quite a bit. And it's a terrific book. I think it's really an important contribution. But the starting point of that book is the idea that the insurance problems, right? The problems with getting enough people reliably insured are separable. They can be separated from, and they have to be separated from, the problems of delivery and innovation. And she said, and the starting point of her book is, I think we know how to solve, at least from an economic perspective, the insurance problem, right? And my book is like a really detailed and interesting and, full of examples, sort of exposition of that solution. She said, I don't know how to solve the problems of getting high quality innovation, getting rid of low quality care, getting cost reduction, because that's the rest of my life. And I think of our book as sort of a step. Yeah, Amy's one of my heroes. She's a magnificent economist. And I think our book is a first step along, maybe not a first step, maybe a first quarter mile along a very long journey to figure out why it is that even if we fix the insurance side and the payer side, we still have really hard problems to solve on how to make this health system better and cheaper.
Well, you guys are my heroes, and I'm hoping if we have a dictator in our country's future, you guys will be president and vice president, and you can slug it out as to which. And you can also, since you look alike, you can kind of switch up that role every day.
Right. Well, we often say that the two of us together would be one really good health economist.
Well, that's great. It's been a great pleasure. We'll get this up in a couple of weeks, and everybody will be able to. All the viewers. We have about 15,000 subscribers, but then they spread around and there's social media. So hopefully, we'll have a fair.
Thank you so much,
Larry.
Thank you, Larry.
I thank you for your including us, and also for your curiosity. It's just fantastic. I love the questions you asked. So
yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. So here again is the book. Why not better and cheaper? And I are asking that question pretty much all the time when we confront things like, hey, the guy can't call me because I live 5 miles over the border. or this part of the hospital can't connect with that part, or this hospital the Tufts cannot connect with MGH and Brigham's. I mean, this is just bizarre, really, in the year 2023. This is more or less like the dark ages of medical practice. And this book is saying we're in the dark ages and it's time to turn on the lights. Anyway, great to have you guys. We will get you back on, and thanks so much again.
Thanks, Larry.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.